welcome to the 325th edition of Talk of the Town. It must be Wednesday night. I'm here, Karen isn't. Karen needs a cold. Karen has a cold, so I like to say she needs a nose mitten. Hope you feel better, babe. I'm sitting in here for tonight, and I think I get the better end of the bargain, but at least I don't have a cold. Listen, I want to welcome you to the show. I got a lot of important things that I want to tell you, so let's just start off with our underwriters, and then I'll go to an announcement I want to make. Our first underwriter, Jeff Cohen, One Stop Painting. They do it all, and as you know, it's a great Plymouth-based company, and Jeff and his crew do great work. Brewster BC Solutions, Wrestling Brewster, and that's PC, I'm being told. Evidently, my lip got stuck over here. Tune into Wrestling with Computers right here on PAC TV. Wrestling has very informative television programs, and he fixes my computer. I know you're not watching wrestling. Next up is Trifletti and Costa, Long Pond Road. Steve Trifletti, Alan Costa, how you doing? And it wouldn't be Talk of the Town without Cape Auto Body and Service with two locations, one on Somerset Street and the other one on Sandwich Street. And as David wants me to remind you, he has the codes. He doesn't have the code for my 2004 Jeep, though. I don't know. David, look, I'm very proud to be a Plymouth Lion, and I just want to make a real fast announcement. Last Thursday night's Lions meeting that was held at Mamma Mia's restaurant, a very wonderful thing happened for the South Shore. The Plymouth Lions donated $12,000 to the local food banks. It's a great, oh wait, I get that wrong. It's not 12,000, it was 20,000. Very proud to be a Lion, and they do wonderful things for the community. Now, this is a call-in show. You can call us here at 508-830-3971. Very interesting show tonight. We're going to be talking with an help me out here, an archaeologist. Thank you. And as you may or may not know, there was a dig that was going on over at the cemetery, over in the area of the cemetery. So I want you to welcome Craig Chartier from the Plymouth Archaeological Rediscovery Project. Did I get that right?
You got that right. That's right.
Thanks for coming here tonight.
That's great to be here. Thank you.
Listen, there was a lot to be said about what was going on over at Burial Hill, and there was this public announcement that was out about that you were looking for a lost fort. And our friends, the Friends of Burial Hill, were sponsoring this event, and it was free and open to the public. For the few that can't remember or didn't know about it, do you think you might be able to bring us up to date?
Oh, sure can. The project all started because coming up pretty soon is going to be the 400th anniversary of the landing of the Pilgrims. And so what we wanted to do is start to look around Plymouth and try to find some evidence of where the first settlement was. And all the years that people have been doing archaeology in downtown Plymouth, we haven't found any traces of where the first settlement was, where the fort was, where the palisade was, where any of the houses were, anything like that. And so while most of the areas that are in downtown Plymouth have been built up and destroyed basically with new houses and such over the centuries, one area that really hasn't been touched is Burial Hill. because it was used as a burial ground by the 1690s at least. And so we figured that would be a good place to start, to try to find some evidence of where the actual fort, the fort meeting house, the palisade, and watchtower, and all those sorts of things could be. And so I approached the Friends of Burial Hill and asked them if they'd like to work together to see if we could figure out some way to start trying to find evidence of where that was. Because it's a burial ground, going up there and doing the usual archaeological techniques of digging holes and sifting the dirt and that sort of thing is sort of out of the question, at least at this point, at least until we know exactly what's there. Because one of the things we wouldn't want to do is end up disturbing someone's
grave. Yeah,
exactly,
sure.
disturbing someone's relative that's there. And so the first thing we did is did a lot of background research. We read through William Bradford's Of Plymouth Plantation and Edward Winslow's books, and John Smith even talked about, Captain John Smith of Virginia fame, he even talked about Plymouth and what the fort looked like. And there was a Dutchman that came over in the 1620s and 1627 named Rosier, and he gave a good description of what it looked like. So we took all those sources, all the historical sources, and we sort of built a picture, a verbal picture, of what we thought would be there. And that gave us sort of a predictive model about what we could expect to find. And looking through all those sources, we know that there was a palisade, which is basically a bunch of posts stuck in the ground.
Okay.
That went around at least part of the fort, and then went around the entire town. It was about a quarter mile in compass. They said about a quarter mile in size. Went around the entire town. And so we know it was up there on the Burial Hill as well. And usually when they build something like a palisade, which we know from down in Virginia, where they found really good evidence of palisades down there with the Jamestown fort,
right,
is what they do is they dig a trench in the ground, maybe a foot wide at most, go down a couple of feet into the ground, and then take split logs and put them into that trench, and then backfill it against there, and so the logs will stick up. So maybe they're 2 feet in the ground and 6 or 8 feet sticking up out of the ground, so you'd have a nice wall going around there. So that's something that you'd be able to see in the ground pretty easily, and that was something that would stay. The traces of it would stay in the ground. And then the fort itself started out originally way back when they first landed. One of the first things they did, they said, is they built a platform up on top of the mount, and that's where Burial Hill is, what they called it back then. Originally, the mount. They built a platform and they put the guns. They got some guns off the Mayflower, and they brought the guns up there and they mounted the guns up there on top of the platform.
Really?
So they wanted to protect Plymouth Harbor. Not against the Native Americans, because cannons would be pretty useless shooting against canoes out in the harbor.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah, but you get the French and you have the Spanish, and you never know who might be coming around. So there's always a problem with pirates. Not so much around here, but more over in England. So they had the cannons there, and then by 1622, they had gotten rid of the platform and built a proper fort/meeting house up there, and they used it for the Sabbath meeting. They used it for any sort of meetings that they had to have, for legal reasons, court cases, court days, that sort of things. And then on the top, they also had the cannons mounted. So we don't know exactly how big it was. We know it was fairly substantial. They had to house all the people who were there in Plymouth on the Sabbath. So that would be a very big signature in the ground, basically. Something we should be able to spot pretty easily. John Smith talks about the palisade and the fort having earth and rocks thrown up against it. So they must have, the idea is that they must have dug the ground up and thrown it up there.
Right.
So as a result of all that background information, we had an idea that we should be able to see something up there of the palisade, like a trench going around where the fort was. And the fort itself should have a pretty big signature of really disturbed soil and such. There's even a case we know in the 17th century where Squanto, everyone knows who Squanto is.
Right. Uh-huh.
Everybody kinds of thinks he was the friend of the Pilgrims and that sort of thing, but he was kind of playing his own game back in the 17th century. And one of the things he'd tell people, he'd say that the Pilgrims had the plague, a great plague that killed so many of the Native Americans around here before the Pilgrims even set foot. Said the Pilgrims had that plague, and they had it up there in their blockhouse, buried in the floor, in the cellar of the blockhouse.
Really?
So he'd go around telling the Native Americans that, and he'd tell them, if you don't want to have the Pilgrims go and release the plague on you,
stay here.
Yeah, stay with, listen to Squanto. Listen what Squanto tells you. he controls the pilgrims. I'll keep you safe, basically. So there was another Native American outside who lived right outside the Palisade named Hobbamock. And he heard what Squanto was saying. He thought that was kind of weird. And so he went up there and he asked the pilgrims if that was true. And they said, no, we have gunpowder that's buried underneath the floor. That's where we keep our gunpowder. So they had some sort of a cellar underneath the floor of the fort.
Because the cannons were up there.
Exactly, yeah. So they'd have a powder chamber there. But they said, we don't control the plague, but our God does. And anytime we want to, we could pray to our God and release that plague on anybody we wanted to.
Oh, boy.
So, yeah, so they were sort of playing the same game, too. But anyway, so we had an idea that, there should be some pits up there and trenches and that sort of thing. And so it was just a matter of trying to figure out a way to find it without digging, which makes it kind of hard. So
I come up with 2 questions out of that.
Okay.
The second question will be a follow-up question. So we don't want to dig because it's a cemetery.
Yep.
So how much modern technology are you using when you're doing these types of digs, as they're called, even though you're not digging? How do you do that?
That's the trick. That's what you have to try to figure out a way to do it. And luckily, especially over in England, they've developed a number of different geophysical techniques, which is basically ways of looking into the ground using different technologies. You can send electrical pulses into the ground to look and see if there's metal there, sort of like metal detecting, but on a larger scale.
Okay.
And there's ground penetrating radar, which is basically kind of like a fish finder when you're out in a boat,
right.
And it sends the sonar waves into the water and sends you a picture of what's below. You can do the same thing on land. You can send radar waves into the ground, and depending on how much resistance is down there, if there's a big rock, then the radar wave is going to bounce back sooner, and you're going to get a different picture than if there's a pit that's been filled in or a grave that's been filled in or something like that.
You see.
And so you'll get a different picture that way. We figured that the magnetometer using the techniques that would find metal wouldn't really give us the best results, and so we chose to go with the ground penetrating radar.
And how effective has it been for you?
We've used it on a lot of different other projects. We did a project down in East Providence earlier this year, where there was a big parking lot with a large wooded area behind it.
Okay.
And you go down there, you look at it, you wouldn't think it's anything but an undeveloped lot, off Newport Avenue down in East Providence. But from the historical records, we knew there was a cemetery in part of it, a historic cemetery dating to the 19th century. And so what we did is we used a ground penetrating radar to go down and look to see if we could find any of the graves in that area. And so we did that first. We did the ground penetrating radar first there, and you could actually see it would give you a profile. And it comes along nice and straight, and all of a sudden you'll have a bump, and then it'll go straight, and then another bump, and those bumps are the actual graves that are there.
Oh.
Yep, so it's a really distinct signature. And what we were able to do after that, after we had those bumps, is we actually had a backhoe come in and strip off the topsoil, and we did what's called ground truthing. And so we could, take those bumps and the little anomalies that we had on the ground penetrating radar screen, and then actually look in the ground and see what it's actually showing. And so that way we can, have a higher degree of confidence that the ground penetrating radar is actually showing us stuff that's actually in the ground. So
now, prior to going on the air, we were having a little bit of a discussion, which really piqued my interest. Was you were talking about one of the wrecks out in the harbor, and could you enlighten our audience as to what you discovered with that? And then we'll go back to the search for the fort.
Mm-hmm.
I think this stuff is fascinating with the technology that you're using.
Yeah, it's state-of-the-art technology.
Yeah.
It's a way of digging in the ground without actually digging and seeing what's in the ground and give you an idea. So anyway, that other thing we were talking about there, we had a couple of different goals when we were surveying up there. We wanted to look and find any evidence of the fort that we could. Mm-hmm. We also knew that there was a watch house that was built up there in the 1640s. We wanted to look for that as well. And then the Friends of Burial Hill, Cheryl especially, she was very interested in the the brig Arnold that was in Plymouth Harbor during the Revolutionary War. And she was really interested in the fact that there's a monument up on Burial Hill, nice stone monument on Burial Hill, to the sailors who died from the brig Arnold. And this ship was caught in a winter storm in Plymouth Harbor. It was trapped out there. It couldn't go anywhere. It got pounded for a number of days. And I think something like 60 of the sailors who were on board the ship died.
Yes.
And then eventually when they could get out to the ship, these guys were all in contorted positions and, wrapped in sails and all sorts of things. And they brought them back to land, and they actually put them in Towne Brook at one point to try to thaw them out so they could, kind of
Bury them.
Actually get them into the coffins and such, but they couldn't. And so they were buried in a common grave, a mass grave, out there somewhere. Now, if you go to Burial Hill nowadays, you'll see that there's the big monument, and that's up on top of a hill.
Yes.
And it's surrounded by graves all around it.
Right.
And there's no way you could have a mass grave for 60 men.
It's not enough room.
Right there. There's not enough room, exactly. So Cheryl, from the Friends of Burial Hill, she had the idea that it had to be somewhere else. And if you stand there and you look around at the cemetery, down the hill, heading towards where the John Carver is, there's a big open area. And it's sort of a depression that's there. There's one gravestone, and I'm not sure when it dates from, but it looks like it's a 20th century gravestone that's sitting there by itself. It's a child's gravestone in that area there. And she said that she wanted us to do some ground penetrating radar there, because she thought maybe, if there's any place around where there could be a big mass grave, that would be a good spot for it. And so we said, sure. I have to tell you, it was myself as the archaeologist, and we have a company we work with called New England Geophysical. A guy named Russ Kempton does all the work for us. He's a professional geophysical guy, does all the ground penetrating radar. So he got his ground penetrating radar machine, which basically looks like a lawnmower. It's got two big wheels on it, and it's got a little box in the front. He just sits there and pushes it along. A lot of times people contact us and say, give us a call. We want to come out and watch you do this ground penetrating radar. And it's about as exciting as watching someone mow a lawn. Without the noise. Yeah, it's very quiet, so there's no noise to it. So anyway, he went and he surveyed across this area. And as he surveyed across, he has a little screen, just like a fish finder screen.
Right.
And he can see things in real time that are there. And as soon as he started going, he said, uh-oh. And he looked at it, and he went all the way across the entire length of this little depression area. And I said, well, what do you see? He said, well, just wait. And then he turned around and went back the other way. And then he turned around and went back the other way again. He went back a few times. He wouldn't tell me what he saw. And then finally he said, well, if you look over here, and he showed me on the screen, in this section right here, these are all the natural soils. It's all nice and level.
Okay.
He said, when you get to right here, all of a sudden it drops down. There's a nice edge. There's a square edge. And nature doesn't give you square edges.
No, it
Nature's
doesn't.
always, smooth.
Right.
He said, there's a square edge here. And then you get down, you see down about 4 feet, it flattens out. But where it's flattening out, there's also all these lumps and bumps and, things that look like they're piled in there. He said, I've worked on projects where we found holes and they're filled with tree limbs and that sort of thing, all those organic things that are decaying. He said, well, they don't look like tree limbs, but they look like there's something organic that's down there that's jumbled up. And he said, you can see it goes from this point, and then we walk down the other way. It's about 20 feet or so, and he goes to this point here, and you can see where it comes up again. And he said, if I've seen mass graves before, I've worked on projects where we've had mass graves before. He said, as far as I can tell, this looks like a mass grave.
I read that story. It was a story. I think I read it in the Old Colony Memorial. I think I did. I'm not sure. And they mentioned that there was a mass grave, and that they really had one really hard time getting all the bodies off, because they were not only had the weather frozen them, but the rigidity of the body and whatnot. This would be very interesting if that is the actual grave that you found. And my hat's off to Cheryl for being so investigative, shall we say. Of course, my hat's always off to Cheryl. She does a wonderful job. Her and her group on the Burial Hill, they do a great job over there. Now, you go on these finds and you go on these searches. I'm sure you're not a philanthropist.
No.
So how do you get paid for doing this? Is it grant money? Just if you wouldn't mind sharing with our caring audience on on this?
Yeah, this one we did with the Friends of Burial Hill was pro bono. I ended up paying the geophysical guy myself.
Oh.
Because the project, is
Well,
so
thank you very
important.
much.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Everyone in Plymouth is welcome for that. But it's
Oh.
because we felt that the project was so important that we wanted to have this survey done with the 400th coming up and such. So we wanted to have that done. But usually, what would happen is an organization will get community funding, like the Community Preservation Act, the
Right.
CPA funding.
CPA funds.
They'll
yeah.
get CPA funds, which is what we did at North Street, 11 North Street, with the Plymouth Antiquarian Society. We did a
Okay.
dig there, and they got CPA funds for it. Other times, there'll be we'll have to do digs because the state has mandated that, because a certain threshold has been reached, that the developer who's putting in a wind farm or a housing development or something like that has to do an archaeological survey before the state, before the Massachusetts Historical Commission will sign off on a certain project. They mandate that the developer has to do a survey first, and so that'll be out of the developer's pocket. He'll have to pay for that. We've done a lot of digs with historical societies and historical organizations, like the Wing Family of America Incorporated in Sandwich, and the Nye family down in Sandwich as well. And they pay for it out of their own organization's budget, basically.
So this project was pro bono. Is there hopes of any kind through Cheryl's group that at some point there'd be some grant money available for you so that you would be able to benefit from your pro bono work?
That's their next step. That's the next step. That's what they're working on right now, is trying to find grant sources to be able to come back and do a more in-depth survey. Because we found something that's there, and that's the big thing that Russ always stresses, that he can find things, he can find anomalies, but just going over it once isn't going to tell you everything. That you have to actually go back and survey it at very close intervals, like 1 foot intervals or 2 foot intervals over that whole area. And then you can actually create a 3D image of what's down there. But that requires 2-3 days to do that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Plus all the computing time and processing time
And
and
then
that sort of thing.
and then there's the actual, you've got a computer generated photo of the area you want to work on. Now comes the hard part.
Yeah.
You guys use little small, like scalpel type devices and brooms to get in there and do this stuff.
Yeah, and that would be the next step after that. We'd have to approach the town of Plymouth and a number of, and the Massachusetts Historical Commission, a number of different people, to actually ground truth that, to be able to put in, a small hole, basically to go down and see what's in there, not remove anything, but just take it down, and we end up finding bones, and that would prove that that's actually what we have there, is a mass grave versus a big hole that somebody dumped logs in or something like that, because people always do crazy stuff.
Stevie and I have been working on a project now for, I don't know, what is it, Stevie, 6 weeks now? Yeah, it's about 6 weeks. The dam is being removed off Billington Street. And we were there it was 2 weeks ago we were there, and there was help me out here, there was a person of your stature who was there throughout the demolition of the dam, and she was looking to make sure that, if there was anything of importance that came out of it. I have never really understood until the Friends of the Hill. I never really understood the importance of this, but now it really rings true, because if you tear something down and you don't know what it is you're tearing down, oh my God, awful. What is there that the people in town can do to help Cheryl's group or to help you in this whole process of being able to cultivate what you're doing? What can we do as a community to help?
The The best thing to do with Burial Hill there is to contact the Friends of Burial Hill,
Okay.
and ask Cheryl directly, what you can do to help preserve Burial Hill, help to maintain Burial Hill, help to fund this project, that sort of thing. As far as our overall goal for my company,
Yes, yes.
that one of the best things to do is just keep your eyes open. Whenever they're doing any kind of construction in and around Plymouth, because so little has been found around Plymouth, and virtually anything that turns up when they're putting in water lines and that sort of thing, any of that stuff that can be found and saved, and then contact my company. We take a look at it and determine if it's significant or not.
What is the name of your company?
The Plymouth Archaeological Rediscovery Project, PARP.
Jimmy, do you have that graphic? There it is, right there. Well, that's your email address.
Yep.
That's all, huh?
Yep.
Okay, so if somebody wanted to get in touch with you, it's craig@plymoutharch.com.
That's right. Or if you go to plymouthart.com, that's our website as well.
Oh, so take the front off.
Yep, take the
Okay.
Craig at off there.
The Craig off, and it becomes your website.
Or if you get on Google and you search for Plymouth Colony Archaeology, we're usually the first thing that comes up. So,
Very good.
yep.
Cheryl, if you're watching, and I think Karen said you are watching, if you could give us a call and let us know what it is we can do to help your group get some funding, we'd appreciate it. 508-830-3971. Thank you, Cheryl. Now, you've got a lot of wonderful goodies here. Do you want to go into some of this stuff with us? Because I'm totally fascinated by what you brought here. And,
Oh, sure.
And it's,
Yeah, we can
I
talk
don't
about
know where you want to start with all this stuff.
Well, the material we have on the table is basically from a couple of different sites that we've been working on recently. Another one of the sites here is another pro bonum site. Another site we've been working on with a landowner down in Sandwich, who helped us find this site a number of years ago, and we were working on it subsequently. It's all the historic material that we have here, and it's a really interesting story how he actually found the site. He bought a house in Sandwich on Water Street. You look at the house on the outside, it looks like, it's a 19th century house, maybe
Okay.
1830s, something like that. And he bought this house and it needed some work on the inside. So he had the contractors go in there and they started pulling down the plasterboard and, taking down the old plaster and starting to redo it. And pretty soon after they got going in there, they started finding all these hand-hewn beams. Now, by the 1830s, they're not using hand-hewn beams anymore like they were in the 17th century.
Okay.
They're doing all, pit sawn, water sawn beams and that sort of thing, machine sawn beams. And so his contractor knew that something was up, something weird was going on, and he told the owner. And the owner, looked around and tried to find somebody who would be able to come over and take a look at these things. And he contacted a man named David Wheelock, who's the curator at the Wing Fort House in Sandwich. And Dave, he used to work at the plantation, Plymouth Plantation. He's an excellent architectural historian, architectural archaeologist. He walked in the house and he said, "Oh my God, what you have here is these are 1650 beams that you have here." And so he called me, so I'm friends with Dave.
Yeah.
And we came over and I looked at it and I said, these are definitely 1650 beams. I said, let's see if we can find out who the house belonged to. Looked in the historical records. Unfortunately, a lot of the records from down Cape there were destroyed in a big fire, a couple of fires that happened over the centuries in the past. And so we couldn't get anything from the records. So we started doing some archaeology outside the house. We dug a number of holes outside the house. We didn't find anything dating back to the 17th century. We stood outside the house and we looked over, and there's a little knoll, a little hill overlooking the pond off Water Street there. And we said, "Oh, who owns that property there?" And the property owner, he said, "Oh yeah, I own that as well." And we said, "Well, could we go over there and dig a couple of holes? Because now we're thinking this house got moved from somewhere."
Probably, yeah.
So he said, "Oh, sure." So we go over there, we dig a few holes, and the first hole we dug, we ended up finding a beautiful 17th century brick. Next hole we dug, we find a arrowhead that dates back to between about 1,000 and 350 years ago. And that was the start of us doing a big excavation there. What we found was a house going back to the 1650s. We think it belonged to Thomas Toby, who was one of the early founders,
Yeah.
early settlers down there in Sandwich. And we've been investigating it, trying to figure out what the layout of the house is, trying to figure out how well off this man Thomas Toby was, because we have historical records, but they don't tell us the complete story about how well off he was and that sort of thing. And then trying to sort of learn the whole history of the house and the site based on the archaeology and the things we're finding in the ground. So a lot of all the historical artifacts that I brought with us today, that I brought with me today.
Any of these from that dig?
They are. Yep.
The one, can I pick my favorite?
Pick your favorite. Yep.
Okay. It's two. These two.
Oh, those aren't from the dig, though.
They're not
those
from
are
the
from a
dig?
different dig.
A different dig.
Those are. We did find some Native American material at the site, but those ones there are from another dig that we're doing. We just did last month, actually, down in Yarmouth, at the Taylor Bray Farm. Taylor Bray Farm.
I know what that is.
Do you?
Yeah.
Oh, it's managed. It's owned by the town, but it's managed by the Taylor Bray Farm Preservation Association.
Yes.
Especially a guy named Jack Duggan. He's the real force behind us doing the archaeology down there. That site there started out because they were renovating the house, the farmhouse that's down there. They were taking down all the plasterboard and stuff because it's a farmhouse that dates back to about the 1780s.
Right.
Took up the floorboards, and all of a sudden they were finding complete plates dating back to the 1830s.
Wow.
Pans, just everything you could think of, shoes, bottles,
It's like
all
hitting
sorts
the
of
lottery.
things. It was,
You
yeah.
know?
But they had the presence of mind to know that we're finding great stuff, but we should get an archaeologist in here. So they called me. I came down, looked at the stuff. I said, "This is great." We ended up doing a number of archaeological excavations around the property over the years. And one of the things we ended up finding was this Native American site that's out in the fields where the donkeys are walking around, where the sheep are out walking around. They have Highland cattle. The Highland cattle are walking around out there. And at the same time, there's all these Native American artifacts that are dating back 3,500 years, maybe 4,000 years ago. And so what we did this year is we had a crew of volunteers.
Yeah.
A number of them came from the Cape Cod Museum of Natural History. We're working together in association with them. And all the rest of them are just folks who signed up because they had either a dream of doing archaeology someday or just an interest in their local history and their local past. And they came down and we excavated a number of little small holes all over the property to try to figure out exactly where the Native American material was. And then we opened up a number of larger holes to try to identify when things were dating to and where the concentrations of burned rock and that sort of thing, how they all tied together with what was going on. And some of the things that we found were, like, for example, the spear point.
That's beautiful.
It is.
It really is beautiful.
Yeah, it's made out of a stone called rhyolite,
Uh-huh.
which is a volcanic stone that comes from up around Boston. The person who was digging this pit, digging this hole where this was found, it's the only thing they found in it. They dug down about 2 feet.
Really?
We take all the dirt out. All the
Sift it?
dirt goes into the screens, gets sifted. This is the only thing that was in the
Really?
whole hole. Yep, just as he was getting ready to finish the hole, he found this down at the bottom of it there.
Beautiful shape.
It dates back between about 4,100 years ago to about 3,500 years ago.
Wow.
It's a spear point called an Atlantic style spear point.
It's really a nice piece.
It is.
Now, were you able to date the other one?
This one here, we think it's about the same time period.
Was it the same place?
It was nearby. It was probably within maybe 100 feet of that
Of that one.
Yep.
So there was active hunting going on
Yep.
in that particular
Yeah,
area.
exactly. What this is here, this is a blank that would eventually be made into something like that.
Oh.
Native Americans would carry around these blanks. They'd find the stones like on the beaches or at
Yeah.
quarries, and they'd work them down into these blanks, and they'd carry these around. And you can turn that into a knife, or you can turn it into a scraper, or you can turn it into a spear point like that.
Did that have the capability also of starting a fire?
This, no,
No?
not really.
Okay.
No, they'd
All right.
use fool's gold. They use pyrite, iron pyrite and quartz,
okay.
and you strike it, and it makes sparks.
I should have
just like
brought
flint and steel.
my piece of stone. I'm trying to figure out what it is.
Oh,
but-
really?
Yeah, I picked up a piece of stone when we were in upstate New York, and in it, I don't want to keep everybody with my fascination with rocks, but it's about this big, and in it is all these bronzy colored specks that are soft to the pick.
Really?
Yeah, very fascinating stone. I picked it up for that. Anyways, now, can you tell us about this? Was very fascinating. When you told me what that was, I couldn't believe it.
Yep. The little round glass disc. And when we found this, immediately the guy who found it said, "Oh, that must be a monocle." You know, he picked it up and put it up to his eye like that. And we said, well, probably not a monocle, but probably just one lens from a spectacle, a pair of spectacles, dating back to the 17th century. I mean, these could be Thomas Toby spectacles.
And it's glass.
It's glass. Yeah, it's glass, and it's you can't see it, on TV here, but it's thin at this edge and thicker down at this edge.
And thicker at the bottom. I noticed that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so as a result, it has a magnifying power. It's not as powerful as these glasses nowadays, but yeah, it would be a small pair of glasses. Be the kind of glasses that just sort of sit on your nose, the little pince-nez glasses that would sit on your nose, but dating back to the 17th century. So if you can imagine William Bradford or Edward Winslow, you're wearing these kind of glasses, these little small glasses that would sit on your nose with lenses just like that. So
you're going to be very happy now. You're going to get a chance to have a sip of your coffee, rest your throat.
Oh, thank you.
Because we've got a caller.
Oh.
Go ahead, caller.
Hi, Ken. It's Cheryl Caputo. How are you from Friends of Burial Hill?
I'm fine,
Hey,
Cheryl.
Cheryl.
Thank you for calling.
No, June and I are watching, and we're just thrilled to see Craig again. He's been a very good friend to Burial Hill, to the Friends of Burial Hill, and frankly, we've learned a lot from him. So we're happy to see him on the show tonight. How are you, Craig?
Good. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. But Ken, you had mentioned, what people might do in order to see, some more GPR done up on the hill. And as Craig said, we're actively seeking funding. The residents themselves, one way they can help is to take out a membership in the Friends of Burial Hill. They can go directly to our website, friendsofburialhill.org, and become members. And that will certainly help. We are also looking at different grants available. We're trying to identify educational grants. I think we will have a good chance seeking funding that way. And, we're also, definitely getting the word out there, about the ground penetrating radar and the benefits to Burial Hill. It'll serve many purposes, identifying, hopefully the mass grave as Craig had talked about, and, the exact whereabouts of the fort, but also just, when improvements are made up on the hill, this is also a great resource to show, things that maybe should not be done up there, as far as, digging for, to place utilities up there, or lighting, that sort of thing, that might get in the way of what we have up there now. And I'm sure Craig can talk to that fact as well. But we're just thrilled to be able to do what we do and to connect with people such as Craig Chartier. He's just he's been a great friend. We thoroughly enjoyed working with him.
He's a wonderful man.
He is.
Now, Cheryl.
Yes.
One more time, slowly. If people want to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
I know. I tend to just try to get everything out at once.
Yes, you're in a hurry. Slow down. No marathons.
friendsofburialhill.org. That's our website.
Okay.
My email is cheryl.burialhillfriends@verizon.net. Did you get that? Did I come across?
I got it, but I don't know if anybody has written it down anywhere. One more time, please.
Okay. friendsofburialhill.org.
Okay. Now,
and another thing too, we just got an email from someone who, through their employer, this was not even solicited. Someone got in touch through their employer, and they're actually going to to apply for a grant on behalf of the Friends of Burial Hill for educational purposes. So that might be another thing, folks could do for us.
That's wonderful. There are grants available. The only problem is you need somebody that knows how to write a grant.
Well, June and I actually wrote the grant for the CPA grant for getting the $500,000 for the town.
Very good.
Yeah, so we think we think we're up to the task, but we'll see. It is a lot of work.
You've been doing a fabulous job, and I know you haven't been doing it alone. You've been doing it with June. It was,
Yep.
the two of you are you're gold. You're really gold.
Well, not just the two of us; it's the whole membership. You know, all the members we have. They're dedicated and they're very active.
I'm sorry, I did not mean to slight anybody else.
No, of course you didn't. No, but we think and even Craig can tell you this. We had Craig identified, just a resident. I'm not even going to name names or anything, but a town resident had actually found this knife. And Craig was able to identify it. Do you remember this, Craig?
I sure do.
You identified that knife, exactly the valley that it came from in New York, the tribe that probably carried this knife. And of course, the person who found it was thrilled. We won't name names, but do you recall that? That was about 2 years ago when you did your first program at Friends of Burial Hill.
I do remember that. Yep, she brought it right up
So
there.
that's.
Yep.
I mean, residents should also consider, Craig for those purposes as well when they want to do something on their own property for investigative purposes.
Mm-hmm.
But listen, I'll let you go because Craig has lots more of interesting things to talk about.
Yes, but before you go, I want to wish you and June and the rest of your group a happy Thanksgiving from Karen and I. And we want you to stay in touch. We want to know what's going on over there. You're doing a fabulous job. And let's keep that line of communication open, okay?
Oh, yes, we definitely will. And we're always tuning in. And happy Thanksgiving to you folks as well. And Craig, happy Thanksgiving. And please tell Karen to get well soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Bye-bye, Fred.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
I knew if anybody could give us
That's right.
a whole bunch of information, it would be Cheryl.
Yeah, that's great.
They're really great people.
Yeah.
What is this?
This right here?
Yes.
This is what's called a trifid spoon. It's a spoon with three prongs on the top, or three ridges on the top of it. Basically, it dates to the late 17th century, or early 18th century. Probably one of these bowls, would go to it. Basically,
Oh.
these are separate. They don't go to
No,
together.
I understand, but that I get it. I just didn't recognize it by itself.
Yeah, what you can't see on here either is someone has carved a V on the very top of it. For what reason, we don't know. Were they numbering their spoons? Do they have a whole series, 1 through 5, and they carved
Was
Roman
their name
numerals?
Violet or
The
Vince?
name Violet,
or
yeah.
Vincent?
There's another one, this other one here, this pipe bowl. It's a tobacco pipe bowl from the late 17th century. And it has a Z or an N on the bottom of it. I don't know if you can make that out on the very bottom there.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. And we know that one of the people who was living there was named Nathaniel. So
And that's a pipe bowl, you said?
Yeah, it's a pipe bowl. It's a tobacco pipe bowl.
Oh, yeah, I
The
see it
stem
now.
part's broken off,
Yeah,
but that's
and
where the tobacco
that's
would go.
that part.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah,
What's
again.
up, Stevie?
I just have a question, if you don't mind.
Sure, I don't mind. Come on in closer so people can hear you.
The arrowheads go back hundreds of thousands of years. Have you found any animal fossils to be able to tell us what type of animals were in this area during those times?
Down here at this site,
Thank you.
none of the
Thanks, Stevie.
at the Taylor Bray farm, we didn't have any shell middens. The only time you get animal bone or any kind of bone preserved for thousands of years is if you have a pile of shell, and the shell will neutralize the acids that are in the soil, and the bone that gets buried, the trash that gets thrown out, will
Right.
get preserved. So we didn't have any of that at this site, but what we did have is some bone that had been burned in a fire.
Oh.
And it's what's called calcined bone, so kind of like cremated bone, basically. And Native Americans, they eat a deer, and then the bits of bone, they throw them into the fire.
Into the fire, yeah.
And they eventually get burned up, and those preserve for thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. So we did find some little bits of calcined bone that probably came from deer. So we know at least that they were eating deer. But the site is right on the creek, right on Chase Garden Creek. So you can imagine they must have been going out there and fishing and fowling and getting animals from down at the beaches as well. So
Any interesting stories relating to those 3 pots?
the 3 big pots
Yeah.
that are there. Well, these are all reproductions,
Okay.
so they're not originals, but they each have their own little stories to them. This one here was given to me by someone who works at Plymouth Plantation.
Bring that over here. There we go.
The person who's in charge of the reproductions, that is at Plymouth Plantation there, she gave me that to use for educational purposes, because it's the same thing as some of the pieces we find in the ground. So this will give people a chance to see what a whole vessel looks like.
That's
when we
very
just find
nice.
those little
That's
tiny
very nicely
fragments.
made too.
It is. Yeah, I think it was
But
made
it's
at the
a
plantation.
reproduction.
Yep, it's a repro. Yeah, we don't usually find that kind of stuff, whole things like that. Yeah.
What is that that gray one?
This one here?
Yes.
This is a German stoneware. This, again, it's a reproduction of a German stoneware vessel. It's a really common kind of jug that we find in the 17th and the 18th century. And this one here came from down in Virginia. When I lived down in Virginia for a year, and I was working on the Jamestown dig, where they were finding Jamestown Fort down there. And there's a pottery down there, Williamsburg Pottery, that makes these reproduction jugs that are down there. So I got this when I was down there, and I've carried it around with me since.
Well, I'm going to hand you this one back.
Okay.
And you can put that one back. And I guess this will move us into my other question about these pieces here. This one here and these over here.
Yeah, these these are a kind of pottery called slipware. It's a Staffordshire slipware. This comes from England. It's made in Staffordshire, England.
And you found that where?
And this was from the Water Street site in Sandwich.
In Sandwich.
Yeah, it's a little cup. You can imagine, it would have stood.
Oh, yeah.
Would have stood like that.
Very thin.
With a nice little rim. Yeah, very thin, nice fine-bodied ware. Very common, about 1675 to about 1775. It's one of the ceramics they stopped importing after the American Revolution, so we can date it, within 100 years. So
the design on it would have to have been either painted on or with another type of process, like a glazing process, I would imagine.
yeah, it's 2 layers basically, 2 layers of glaze.
Is it?
They put a brown layer down first, and then a yellow layer on top. And then they use a tool kind of like a comb to comb through. So they comb along this way to make the lines going that way, and then they
Okay.
comb up to do those little lines that are going up there. So
Now
it's
the
like
flip
comb,
side of it is just plain.
just plain. Yep.
Wow, but look at the cracks in it.
Yep. I mean, it was many fragments.
I'm sorry,
we
but did you
found.
say when you thought that the date of that was? Did
About
you-
1675 to about 1775.
Wow.
Is when they were making those.
Holy
Yep.
good.
Yeah, it's pretty
Wow.
common stuff for that time period. So, but it gives us a real nice date.
It's such an interesting thing. Steve, you have a follow-up question?
Well, I have another question.
Okay.
This is from Jim. Jim wanted me to ask you that since you're doing a great job up in Burial Hill, is there any plans of expanding up to Coles Hill, where they feel there's been, I guess, other graves up there, or other artifacts that could be found?
That's the next spot that we'd like to go. Yeah, the next spot would be Coles Hill, because we've done a lot of background research there already, because there have been a number of graves that washed out in the 18th and the 19th century that washed out of the hill, and also graves that they encountered when they were putting in fence posts and things like that up there on top of Coles Hill. And so there could be graves, right out into the street, up there on top of Coles Hill, heading out into the surrounding properties that are
Right.
around up there. And those are something that we could identify really easily using ground penetrating radar. Just go over the entire thing with a grid of ground penetrating radar surveys, and you'd be able to see any other graves that are
That's
up there.
a fascinating area up there.
It is. It sure is.
I'm afraid to touch a lot of this stuff, and I'm sorry for. Can you date this for us and tell us where you got it?
Yeah, this again is from down there at Water Street in Sandwich, and this is a very rare kind of ceramic. It's a tin glaze ceramic, so it's got a very, very thin, sort of fragile glaze that's on the outside of it that chips off really easily.
Okay.
And the interesting thing about this is that this was actually made in Portugal. It's a Portuguese ceramic.
Really?
Which is very rare to find it in New England.
So we had a Portuguese pilgrim.
Well, it means that.
Yeah.
It means that someone was trading.
Ah, come on! I'm just kidding.
They were
Just
trading from
kidding.
Portugal. So,
Really?
yeah, as far as we know, that's probably more likely than having a Portuguese pilgrim. But,
Yeah. Well,
but it'd be a nice little like dish, basically, fine dish. But it's something that not everybody would have, and it would be something that would be pretty expensive back then.
this one would date to what, and where would that be from?
That dates to about 1650. That one there, and it's sort of like a little medicine jar like this one.
Oh.
Yeah, but it's a different form. Instead of being a little squat one, which is later in the century, that's a taller one. So it's a tall, thin medicine jar. And like I said, it dates to about 1650 from down there at that site
The
in
same
Water
site
Street.
in Water Street.
Yeah, exactly. Which is being developed now. The owner now is getting a nonprofit status for his his property, and he wants to start getting school groups to come there and visit the site, and also to help do the excavations. Try to get volunteers and be able to get grants and get volunteers to come down and help do the excavations. That's one of the most important things that we do, is try to get volunteers to work with us to get their hands dirty doing the archaeology. Because we feel that this archaeology, everything we find, all the findings from Burial Hill and everything doesn't belong to me, and it doesn't belong to the Massachusetts Historical Commission or anything. It belongs to all the people who
Right.
live in the town. It's
Everybody's got a
it's
stake
your
in it.
history. It's their history.
Right.
So exactly, yeah. You want to give people a vested interest. That way, they'll know that it's their stuff that could potentially be destroyed or whatever. So.
I wonder how that piece of rusty metal over there, that is an interesting thing.
Yeah, it doesn't look like much.
No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. But if you imagine this piece here with the same thing coming off the other end, maybe a little bit longer and a little bit pointier on the end there, what we think it was a dung fork. And not a fork for eating dung, but a fork for moving
Shoveling
dung.
it.
For moving dung, yep. Getting it out of the way, basically. Something you'd have if you had if you had animals, in the 17th, 18th, 19th century. They're going to produce dung. You're going to need a fork to get the dung out of the way. So
Were
this
you
is-
able to date when that was? Did you? Were you able to figure it out, or it's just an approximate thing?
No, it's handmade, so you can't really date it too precisely, but based on the fact that it was found with these other artifacts, they date to the 17th and early 18th century. It probably dates that same time period, 17th to early 18th century.
You did a great job. You really do. And
like it.
what are these two items over here?
These ones here?
Yeah.
Down at that site in Sandwich, we found a lot of evidence of horses. And these are a couple of different kinds of equipment for horses, for horse bits. The cheek
Oh,
bits, the bits that would go
up
on the
here.
side. And
Ah.
the bit would go across in the horse's
Right.
mouth, and these go on the side from two different styles of bits. And we also found a number of horseshoes at the site, and we could tell by measuring the horseshoes that there were two different size horses that they had at the site. They had a smaller horse that was probably more like maybe even a mule or a donkey, something that would be like a pack horse
Okay.
that you'd use for carrying stuff, carrying your grain to the mill to be ground and that sort of thing. And then there was a larger horseshoe that probably came from a riding horse. And along with that went this thing here, which is a spur. This would go on the back of a man's riding
boot.
boots.
Yeah.
And it would have the little rondelle on the back there, and that's what you'd stick into the horse basically to make him go faster. But again, this is something that someone of higher status, somebody who could afford Portuguese ceramics and ceramics that came from England and that sort of thing would have versus just
Right.
a Joe Schmo. So that was more evidence that we think the guy who lived down there, Thomas Toby, was pretty well off. So.
Really? So it gives you an idea of the value of the resident of the area.
Yep. Yeah, that's what we try to do. Is we try to dig this stuff up and then put it within a context and try to have it, give us some story about what we're finding down there.
Now, is that a horseshoe?
This one here. Some people think it looks like a horseshoe. It's actually an oxen shoe.
Oh,
Yep. Oxen hoofs are bifurcated. There are two of them.
right.
And so you have these oxen shoes that are two paired shoes that are separate, whereas a horseshoe is one big piece that goes all the way around in a U shape. These separate ones go one on each of the hoofs of the oxen, and so we know they were using oxen probably for pulling plows or pulling wagons, that sort of thing.
Now, was it the Water Street, or was that in Yarmouth?
This is Water Street.
That's Water Street?
Yep. Yeah, everything from Yarmouth this year was all
All that
the
other
stone stuff. Yeah, we
Yeah.
had probably a couple of dozen spear points, all dating to the same time period. We had this little thing here, which doesn't look like much, but it's actually one of the most interesting artifacts we had because we think it is it's got a bevel on one edge, it's got a notch going around it, and it looks just like a little stone adze
Yeah.
for doing woodworking, but it's the
Right.
wrong kind of stone, so we think it's actually a toy adze. Something that a child would have used, sort of a child's play toy. Either that or it's some kind of little, ceremonial deposit or something like that. But we think most likely it's probably, a child's toy. Some father, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, made this little toy ads for his son to play with.
Well, see, I'd look at that and I think it's just a rock.
Well,
I mean, you know,
you can see it's it's
yeah,
packed
somebody's
around
worked
there.
on it, yeah.
Yeah, that's
But-
what makes it jump out at us. You know.
I think
it's not
that's
just
part
a
of the
rock.
reason for my fascination with stones is like when we go away on vacation, I'll start looking at stones and, you know, some people pick up seashells. I just like to pick up stones.
Yeah.
But
So do I.
an hour flies by.
Is it already?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
I've got just about a minute that I can let you have. But you've actually had the whole 56 minutes because I've worn you out. But how would people get in touch with you again?
They can either email me, craig@plymoutharch.com. They can search online on Google for Plymouth Colony Archaeology, and you'll come up with our website, Plymouth Archaeological Rediscovery Project. All my contact information's on there, phone number, address, that sort of thing.
And if all else fails, they can call Cheryl.
That's right, they can call Cheryl.
Yeah.
That's right.
Craig, it's been fabulous. It's been very fascinating. I want to
you.
thank you very much for being here. Listen, I want to take this last minute and 10 seconds to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. Talk of the Town won't be broadcasting live next Wednesday night, where Karen and I are trying to figure out what rerun we want to put on the air. But we will be back with you in December. I don't know who Karen has got for a guest in December, but you know, it's been a great year. Talk of the Town has had a wonderful time with all of you, and you know, we hope that you have enjoyed this programming. We take a lot of pride in what we put together, and my wife says to tell Craig it was great. We want to wish you a happy Thanksgiving. Again, we won't be on next Wednesday. We'll be in a rerun. We'll figure that out. We hope you tune in. We hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. And on behalf of the crew, Jimmy and Stephen, the two faithful comrades here, and my wife Karen, we want to wish you a very happy Thanksgiving. And Talk of the Town, we'll see you live in 14. Have a good Thanksgiving, everybody. Good night.